Battlefield Trust. It is Gettysburg 162. We hope you've been joining us on a bunch of our live feeds and other videos that we've had, and we hope you're having a meaningful commemoration for this 162. By my count, I think this is my 35th Gettysburg anniversary. I've been to more than 1/5 of them, and maybe before I pass from this earth, I'll have been to 1/3 of them or something like that, saying that maybe it just wasn't all that long ago. Okay, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We have Kris White behind the camera. I'm looking at Sarah K. Bierle, and I'm looking at two other guests that we're going to introduce before long as we come talk about walk and climax Pickett's charge, or the Pickett, Pettigrew, Trimble assault, or Longstreet's assault, or whatever you want to talk about it. We're on Seminary Ridge over here. I'm looking right now at Cemetery Ridge across the way, the famous view that so many people like to contemplate. And of course, this is the Virginia Memorial behind me. Now, hopefully you've been with us already while we covered the first day, while we got into the second day, and I think you know what these things consist of. On the first day, the Confederates drive the Union Army back through town to Cemetery Hill, where the Union had a stronghold. On the second day, the Confederates sort of attack the flanks of the Union Army at places that are now famous: Little Round Top, Devil's Den, the Wheatfield, Peach Orchard, Cemetery Ridge, Culp's Hill, East Cemetery Hill, and some other places as well. Of course, during one of these attacks, maybe the Confederates found the Union line in the center of its fish hook line. Maybe that wasn't so strong, and that's going to influence Robert E. Lee's thinking on the third day. And on this third day, it's going to be a hot day, a very hot day. Maybe we'll talk about that a little bit more. And to set up Pickett's charge, let's bring on our good friend, Wayne Motts. We're talking National Civil War Museum, one of my oldest battlefield friends. He's been a battlefield guide here since 1902 or something like that. And he knows this place, and he's written a book about Pickett's charge.
When I didn't have gray hair, Gary, when both of us looked a lot different than we are now. But thanks a lot.
I remember the days. Take it away, man.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Gary. Thank you for being here. So listen, Gary's brought you up to the third day's battle, and now Robert E. Lee, he has two reports on the Battle of Gettysburg, and he writes the general plan was unchanged, and he really feels that he needs and can get coordination between these parts of the Confederate Army for July 3rd, 1863. And so what he wants is an assault somewhere near the center of the Union line, and he wants a renewed attack over on Culp's Hill, where Richard Ewell and the 2nd Confederate Army Corps soldiers are located, and where they've got a foothold right at the bottom of that hill. And he also knows he's got increased artillery from the area known as the Peach Orchard there. So on July 3rd, 1863, Robert E. Lee's going to get up early. He's going to ride down to the lower part of the battlefield. He's going to meet with General James Longstreet, and they're going to meet within cannon shot, at least that's what was reported from the Union Army, which will be right around the Peach Orchard area. And General James Longstreet, Robert E. Lee, several senior commanders will discuss this plan of attack for July 3rd, 1863. But the Union Army will attack and preempt all these plans by attacking very early in the morning on July 3rd. And now Robert E. Lee has to come up with Plan B. I always like to tell everybody, Pickett's charge is Plan B. It's not Robert E. Lee's Plan A. He wanted coordination between both these wings, and he's not really going to get that for July 3rd. So the Pickett's charge that we know of is really born out of the circumstances for July 3rd. And he and General Longstreet will discuss this assault. Some people might say he's not discussing with Longstreet, he's telling Longstreet, but he'll come up with this plan that will be for July 3rd, 1863 for the morning, and then Longstreet will ride back, and parts of the Confederate Army, 4 Confederate divisions belonging not just to Pickett, but also to Pettigrew and Trimble, as we mentioned earlier, and part of Richard Anderson will support the right of this attack for this assault, which will also involve a cannonade, a preparation for the attack for July 3rd, 1863. So that's the beginning of why we have a July 3rd and Pickett's charge. So we're going to send it back to Gary. And Gary, you can bring up any more I might have missed if you want to.
You didn't miss anything, sir. Thank you so much, Wayne. So that's sort of setting up some of the troops there, and you referenced like a cannonade. I don't know what this next guest is going to say. Maybe he's going to get more into the infantry, or maybe he's going to lay them out a little, or maybe he's going to just start talking about the artillery. But to find out, we need to bring him on. Doug Douds, Dr. Doug Douds, Colonel Doug Douds, U.S. Army War College, licensed battlefield guide, and more. Welcome, man.
Thanks, Gary. It's a pleasure to be here. Hey, welcome, everybody. Thrilled to be here here. So Wayne brought up a bunch of things. What we talked about is, okay, now we've created this attack, and that's great. And Lee has put Longstreet in charge of it. Now, notionally, Robert E. Lee would write after this whole thing is over is, except for a proper concert of action, we would have been successful. Concert of action. What he's talking about is units operating harmoniously together to include not only units from different corps, but also the artillery in support of these attacks. So when we think about it, if you think about who is the harmony guy, who's the proper concert of action guy, it's Robert E. Lee. So already when he gives Longstreet command of this, we're going to run into some command and control issues because one of those major divisions, Pickett's division, belongs to Longstreet. Two of the divisions that we're going to talk about to the north belong to A.P. Hill. How we coordinate the use of this is going to be an issue, and it will have an impact for how this attack leaves this tree line, certainly, but also when we think about artillery. Now, Robert E. Lee, one of the things he's going to do in order to make this successful, he's going to put together an artillery line, almost 150 guns, with the idea that they're going to tear that position limbless. This is going to be his hedge against the fact of how do I generate enough combat power? Because as we know, the Confederates will break through about where that obelisk monument is on the afternoon of July 2nd. And Rand's right would tell everybody, it's not so hard to get there, it's hard to stay there. The whole Union Army is over there. And so what Robert E. Lee has to do is generate the combat power necessarily to make that successful. So that 150 guns, the cannons that he's going to put out, are going to stretch. And we'll be able to see this better when we clear this tree line. But from the Peach Orchard along the Emmitsburg Road into this tree line, all this artillery behind us and running along that tree line, going to tear that position limbless. So we'll be able to see better what that position is. Now, that bombardment, people talk about how long it is. Initially, the thought is it might take about 20 minutes. Now, ultimately, we know it takes longer. I think of the 79 accounts that reference the bombardment, the average number is about an hour and a half. Now, that being the case, the idea of who controls all this. We know that Edward Porter Alexander controls the artillery for Longstreet's Corps. But this is interesting. He's not his chief artillerist. He's an artillery battalion commander who is synchronizing the use of all this artillery. Because when we think about the advantage that the Confederates have, although they're on the outside of that fishhook-shaped line, technically speaking, they could focus all their combat power on the nose or on Cemetery Hill. But one of the critiques they're going to have is without a controlling hand, because there is no artillery reserve in the Army of Northern Virginia, although there had used to be in the recent artillery reorganization before the campaign. Now under William Pendleton, he is the titular chief of artillery, which effectively makes him an ordnance chief because he is perhaps in one of the best cases of talent management in the Army of Northern Virginia. Robert E. Lee realizes William Pendleton is not a great artillerist, so he puts him in he's in command of 0 pieces of artillery. But notionally, the orders for the bombardment go through William Pendleton for him to coordinate this. This will have issues as we go forward.
Good. Thanks so much, Doug. Now, as we maybe start walking here, I'd look to you or to Wayne. Let's start to get into more of, we're going to walk down a path, a seldom trod path, actually. I think people tend to either go that way or go from the North Carolina monument. We're going to kind of split the difference between the two. So just set it up like as we start to walk, who's on our left and who's on our right? And it looks like Wayne's coming back. Wayne co-wrote a book with Jim Hessler about Pickett's Charge, and it is the new standard work. I love it, and it's really good about placing you on the ground.
Yeah, so Gary, these different brigades that are lined up here, Pickett's men will be off to the right of your view, and you'll have the 3 brigades of Pickett's division, which will be Armstead, Garnett, and Kemper. And then right over here off the left of your view, right along this fence line, we'll have the extreme right of Pettigrew's division here. And of course, General Pettigrew is going to take the place for the wounded Henry Heath, who was wounded on July 1st, 1863. So the right of this will be the brigade of James Archer, and General Archer was captured on July 1st, so this will be under the command of Burkett Fry, the colonel of the 13th Alabama, and the right of it will be right along where this fence line is. Then, of course, you will go into Davis's brigade, you will go to James Keith Marshall's brigade, Marshall brigade first, then Davis, then Brockenbrough, make sure I get this all right, from right to left, and then behind you'll have Lawrence and Lane's brigade, which will be part of Isaac Trimble, and that will be the division of William Dorsey Pender. William Dorsey Pender mortally wounded here on the second days of the battle. So those are the 9 initial brigades. So you've got 3 that are over here to the right. You've got the 4 that are right along here. Then you've got the 2 that are in the back, if I'm counting correctly. And then you've got 2 more that are on the far right, which are under Cabot Wilcox, Alabamans, and then under David Lang, Floridians. And those 2 will be part of Richard Anderson, and they're to support Pickett's right. So we got 11 of these brigades, if we've got it all together correctly. Correct me if I'm wrong, guys, but you're getting me right off the cuff here.
No, I think you were the right man for that job there. Now, let's see. You brought up Fry took over for Archer, and, and this is tough. When you start studying the Civil War, I mean, this stuff gets difficult, and you know that Pender is wounded, so you got Isaac Trimble commanding sort of part of his division, but you also mentioned Marshall, Lawrence. Anybody studying the order of battle doesn't think of these guys as being brigade commanders, so Pettigrew's moving up for Heath, and do you want to get into that at all?
Well, the problem is the casualties that are suffered for July 1st and 2nd for these units. So let me just ask the viewers to keep in mind this at all times. The number of people you think in Pickett's charge, you don't know, you'll never know, so don't worry about it. Everybody gets worried about whether we've got 12,000, 11,000. I started guiding here, Gary, you mentioned 1988, there were 15,000.
That's the year I used, that's
1988, 15,000 men were in Pickett's charge. Every year I'm here, the number goes down, Gary. It's going to be the 4 of us attacking here on July 3rd, and that's it. So people keep changing these numbers, and they just keep getting lower. We will never know how many people are involved in this because of the casualties suffered on July 1st and 2nd. And many of these commanders are going to be new to command. That is a terrific problem for unity of command and combat cohesion for some of these troops, and Colonel Doug can talk more about it. But Isaac Trimble, he's brand new. Nobody knows him floating around here. James Keith Marshall is a colonel and is in the North Carolina Brigade, and he's the other brigade commander killed at Gettysburg. You never hear about it. You hear about General Garnett, General Armstead, General Kemper. 2 of these men are killed. You never hear about James Keith Marshall, who it takes over for Pettigrew, because Pettigrew is elevated to the command of the division. But there's many changes of command here, and in my view, that's going to be a problem for these troops that are here.
I think it's really important when you think about this. This is you're really talking about command and control, because for all the people that these are used to taking orders to on July 1st, or even on the campaign to get here, imagine what we will when we talk about a commander, a division commander like Dorsey Pender. When he goes down, that means a brigade commander has to become a division commander, a regimental commander has to become a brigade commander, some company commander has to become a regimental commander, and some schmo just became a company commander. That wouldn't go smoothly if we all stood around a campfire. Do that in the middle of a campaign. Now go ahead and combine 3 divisions from 2 different corps together. You can imagine how the command and control will now add friction to trying to coordinate this, that we end up with this one concerted fist across this field to shatter the Union lines.
Okay, so I think we're going to walk across this field here, of course, and I would invite either of you, as we start to walk, to answer the question that everybody has, okay? And let me just say that we today know that this didn't go well, and then think, aha, something else would have been better, and therefore we congratulate ourselves on how smart we are. Okay, of course, Robert E. Lee didn't know it wasn't going to go well. He, would have liked to have known this stuff before the battle, but he was putting it all in. So I don't know if either of you guys want to reflect on this. What was he thinking is the question I get more than anybody else. So let's start to walk and break it out.
Yeah, so I would argue there's a couple of things at play here. First of all, Lee understands the recommendation of Longstreet of this is a bad idea, no 15,000 men can cross that field and take that position. Robert E. Lee, the Army of Northern Virginia commander, would agree. This is not an optimal solution. But I would argue Robert E. Lee is not only the Army of Northern Virginia commander, but he's also the principal military advisor to Jefferson Davis. If you look at how does the Confederacy get to independence, well, it's not going to get there diplomatically. It's not going to get there informationally. They're the global spokesman for slavery, and slavery is a global loser. They're not going to get there economically. The Union has them now fairly blockaded, so they're really down to the military instrument of national power. And if you think about it, right now it's day 46 of siege in Vicksburg. So if the Confederacy wants to achieve its independence, it's because they're going to be successful here. So that's the hat he's wearing when he makes this decision. The other thing, student of history, hey look, attacks like this had worked at Glendale. Napoleon III at Solferino in 1859 shelled the center of the Austrian position, launched an attack, shattered their... So as a student of history, he knows that this might work. Oh, by the way, if we look at the psychological impacts of this, look, the Army of Northern Virginia is still on the battlefield with the Army of the Potomac after 2 days. This is a boundary condition. The one people who never disappoint are the guys on this side of the field. They'll get it done. The guys who always disappoint are on that side of the field. So this can work out in their favor. So I think he has multiple ideas in his mind's eye, and if you want to go finally to recency bias, I think Robert E. Lee looks back to a time, perhaps on the 17th of September, 1862, when the Sunken Road falls. He's got no reserves left. He's got a thin line of infantry of about 250 men. Longstreet's holding the reins of his staff as they work a single piece of artillery. Look across the creek at a Union general who has thousands of men left on the other side of the creek and is not willing to risk them. Well, Robert E. Lee's name is audacity, and this just might work.
He's also got a great example for July 1st, 1863. He doesn't even have to go back that far to look at the assault. If you go up to Robert E. Lee's headquarters at the Widow Thompson's house, preserved by the American Battlefield Trust, you stand there and look across those fields to the west. On July 1st, Lee sends an assault right across that field that strikes that seminary, breaks that Union line, and drives it right into the center of town. And it's a frontal assault against that position that has artillery. So he's got an example that's only 2 days earlier, and on the day before, of course, he's got troops getting up very close to the Union line that's right there. So as we're walking forward, these are all things to consider that are going on Robert E. Lee's head. It's easy to look back now with 100% hindsight and know that was a mistake. He writes Jeff Davis right at the end of July of 1863, and he tells the President of the Confederacy, if I would have foreseen the course of the last day's action, I would have changed what I would have done. So he knows that, looking back now, that was a mistake. But he doesn't know about that right here on July 3rd. He's doing what he's got to do.
I think it's a really good point, because even if he makes an assessment of the field, we know July 2nd how it turns out. But if you're Robert E. Lee, you go, well, except for 5 minutes, we would have been up on Little Round Top. We drove him out of Devil's Den. We drove him out of the wheat field. We drove him out of the peach orchard. We still own that. We broke through the center of that Union line, except for that proper concert of action. We'd still be there. We got a foothold up on Culp's Hill. And last night, in the dark, we drove them off the strongest position that they had. So I think the most recent thing says they're hanging by a thread. I know what it's like to hang by a thread, and all we have to do is push a little bit harder, and this will all be over.
So you'll notice as we walk through here, we're down in some undulations of where the ground are located. The terrain here is very important. So right around 3 o'clock after this 2-hour cannonade, the assault will be ordered, and we're on the extreme right of Pettigrew and Trimble's division, which would be the northern wing of this assault. And if we want to swing around, Gary's right over here. You guys can jump in anytime you want. Right over here, the wood line that you see right over here, the point of woods, the starting point for where Pickett's division is. Between us and them, this will be an open space because you can be seen if you're looking at from the Union Army over to here. So you're using this ground for cover, which is a very important spot. So where we're at right now, we're going to come back up and go down. A lot of the undulations, and no matter where you walk Pickett's charge, every place is different. So if you decide one time you want to come out here and walk Pickett, it's going to be a lot different than if you want to walk on the northern edge of the assault that's here.
Good. I think Sarah's got something.
Yeah, Wayne, I want to jump in and build off what the gentlemen were saying, looking back to some other battles, because I noticed one they did not mention, and that's Chancellorsville, which is just a few weeks before Gettysburg. And to build off what Wayne was just sharing, thinking about terrain. Now, it's very different terrain between Gettysburg and Chancellorsville. Here, it's open. We've got big open fields, so different type of fighting to some extent. But think about it, Chancellorsville, Lee and Jackson are going to make an attack on the flank. That's going to actually have success for them on May 2nd, 1863. And then what does Lee do on that third day of the battle, May 3rd, 1863? He's going to punch into the center. Now, there's some different things at play in Chancellorsville. I'm not here to say they're carbon copies or anything like that, but think about that idea. Lee's been able to punch through the center before, after realizing there were issues on flanks. So maybe that's tying into some of his thoughts here. Now, one thing that's a little bit different, he's still fighting the Army of the Potomac, but the Army of the Potomac that left Chancellorsville the common soldiers are not happy about leaving that battlefield. A lot of them are saying in their writings, if we were in open field and could have a fair fight, we would win. And I present to you some open fields and Cemetery Ridge. And are they going to have a fair fight? Let's continue on with the story and see what happens.
Good transition, Sarah Bierle. Let's see. I'd like to walk a few steps over here when Kris is ready. Kris is literally editing this on the fly, adding the assets and all those things you see. It's happening in real time. But right as we get right here. So first of all, there's a few things. Just from the 5 steps we took, Little Round Top has disappeared. You can see the summit of Big Round Top, Kris is pointing to over there, but Little Round Top is gone. And I can barely see the crest of Cemetery Ridge from here. And as we go down into this gully, we're going to lose that crest again. You could say that that's a good thing for the Confederates who are going to get cover. You're going to say that maybe they can't see what they're looking at as well. And of course, the Confederates might, be tempted to not move on when they're not getting shot at as much when they are hidden underground over here. Another thing I see, and you might have noticed, I was looking at the camera that Kris was shooting. It's just beautiful here. It just rained. The clouds are beautiful. And often battlefields look like this. I'm going to point this out because we started out, I was joking with Wayne. We were joking and laughing on a battlefield. Is this okay? I just think it's important to note for those of you who haven't been to battlefields before that people engage with battlefields in different ways. They are beautiful places to walk and to reflect and sometimes to go heavy, but the soldiers during the fights went light, and they told jokes during the fights. There's a guy in Pickett's charge who actually, I believe, walked up to somebody else and said, oh, he's been killed. His head was just shot off by a shell. And somebody else said, did he live? And everybody around him started cracking up, okay? I mean, there are jokes during battles. The veterans come back and have fun as well, and they also reflect. And I just think it's important to say, because we at the Trust and some of our friends, we are irreverent about things. And I just see a moment of extreme beauty around us right now with a story of absolute terror and is exhibiting every range of emotion, if you could imagine, happening actually during a battle. So I just wanted to jump on with that. I see Doug is holding the mic, but we can keep moving or not.
Yeah, well, so the question is, we've talked about the artillery bombardment. One of the things that's going to happen is 10 minutes after the Confederates fire, 80 Union pieces will reply. Again, soon, there was probably about as much wind as there is today, so about 2 knots of wind from south to north. Soon this entire valley fills with smoke. You can see there's not even a lot of elevation to the ground that the Confederates have to target with their artillery. And people talk about the overshoots over on the Union side. Of course, they're trying to pound that part of the line to make it better for their infantry, but many of those shots are overshots, and people say, well, that's poorly manufactured Confederate artillery rounds. That's true. But the other thing I would also argue is, at this point, the Confederates know they're attacking the Union fishhook line, and if they're going to attack the Union center, what they can't afford to do is get over there and have a conveyor belt of Union reinforcements right behind there. So I would argue those overshoots were not only expected, they were desired. Today, if we would write the order for the Confederate artillery on July 3rd, we would say isolate that part of the battle space. And effectively, they do. The overshots, destroy Meade's headquarters, the artillery reserve, the ambulance park, and all the reserves right behind that ridge line that they can't see are now cleared off. So they've created this thin crust for Pickett's men to now punch through. And I would argue that part of the bombardment is successful.
I love this. Super interesting. Let's keep walking again. I'm going to bring Wayne on in a second here. We battlefield guides will go out and do our thing. And, whether I'm listening to a podcast, watching a video, or out with other guides, I've never even considered that. I just love that this is a never-ending topic that we can get into. Now, Wayne, I'm hoping, and by the way, you're with the American Battlefield Trust. We're walking the field of Pickett's charge here with Doug Douds and Wayne Motts, Sarah Bierle, and I'm Garry Adelman, Kris White behind the camera. And I'm just hoping, Wayne, that you could maybe start to narrate, what would a soldier on Burkett Fry's right see? Can they see more of Pettigrew? Is Armistead or Garnett in view here? What's happening for the individual soldier?
Well, for the individual soldier, Garry, and it's a great question, they don't get to see a lot of things because of the terrain here. And if you read the accounts, you often feel that some of these men feel they're not supported because they look over here to the right, and of course this little hillock that you see right here, the exact left-hand side of where Armistead is, you may see just the top of it, but you're not seeing all the rest of the brigades that are down below that. And then if you swing around over here to the left, where we're at right here, you're going to be able to see most of the left of Pettigrew as it moves forward here. And then about a football and a half field or so behind where General Pettigrew's men are going to be the 2 brigades under General Trimble. And they'll come out of those wood lines as Pettigrew's men are advancing. There was to be a worked out coordination between which is the brigade of direction. Which group is going to dictate the scheme of maneuver here, so to speak, for July 3rd, 1863. And that's going to be right along this fence, right here where we're walking, which is the right of Burkett Fry's brigade, which is archers, Alabamans, and Tennesseans. And this will be what they call the brigade of direction. So everybody in this attack, if you're moving along this line, you're on the left or north of where we're at, to the left of your view, you are moving to the right or to the right of the view, and everybody on the right of this view is moving to the left to try to meet toward the middle. And the goal is that they're going to meet somewhere up near the Emmitsburg Road. And Gary, we also should talk about the fencing here.
I was just going to bring Doug out for this.
Oh, okay.
Intro it.
Okay,
here we go. Here's your question.
Yeah.
Fences, go.
All right, so on the battlefield today, this is a product of North American agricultural system. We flipped the coin. In the old world, there's so little land, you got to fence animals in. In the new world, there's so much land, you got to fence animals out, which means we have fences everywhere. Today on the battlefield, there's about 2/3 of the number that were here at the time of the battle. Now, the way this works, and certainly its impact for Pickett's charges, when an infantry line came up to a fence line, we would just use the weight of our numbers and we would push that thing over. Now, when we think about it, yesterday, as we launched that attack from south to north and they break through just where that obelisk monument is, that means many of the fence lines to the south had been knocked over on July 2nd. But it means when that attack does not continue to north, for many of the men in Pettigrew and Trimble's division, when they get to these fence lines, it's the first time anybody's been out here, and now they've got to go ahead and push them over, which means it takes them more time, which means it's longer that they're under artillery fire. So the fences have a dramatic impact on movement, which is certainly what we're going to talk about as they march across this field. Because remember, we call it Pickett's charge, but nobody charges across the field. They march across the field. And one of the things I'd like to bring up about Wayne, because we were just talking about the idea of this change of command because of the loss of leaders. When we think about it, Edward Porter Alexander sends a note to Pickett. Pickett goes over to Longstreet. Pickett rides over up into your post. And remember, today you're from Old Virginia. Okay, that gets Pickett's going. Who's telling Pettigrew or Trimble to go? So there's not a lot of information out there. Some people suggest that Edward Porter Alexander sends a courtesy note to Pettigrew to go ahead and get in the attack, which means artillery battalion commander in Longstreet's corps is now ordering 2 divisions to go in the attack. That's redonkulous. So what really happens is, I would argue, Pickett goes, then Pettigrew sees them going and goes, oh my gosh, we need to get going. Which is why when you look at maps that are well drawn of this, it almost looks like this is an echelon attack from south to north, because each one of these brigades is going to exit the woods when they see the brigade to their right has gone forward. So it means the whole thing is strung out to our right or to the north as we look across this field. Effectively, if we're trying... all military attacks tend towards confusion and chaos. The idea that we start as organized as possible at the beginning of attack becomes absolutely crucial, and I would argue it breaks down at the very beginning because of many of those leadership losses that have already happened.
Good. I might pass it back to Wayne in a second here, but just look how things have changed. Suddenly I can see both round tops, and if you walk this path on the right, kind of Armistead's path, you would see Union artillery would be able to reach you. Some of those guns that helped to defend or provide strength on Little Round Top on July 2nd pivoted to fire into Pickett's charge. And they're going to have 4, then 3, then 2, then 1 gun as they get closer to the Union line here. But we would have been comparatively safe over here, Wayne. One more thing before I pass it over to you is we've seen some kind of fallow fields here with beautiful wildflowers, and now we're going to see one of the tilled fields. Of course, these were farmer fields. We have some pretty good maps about what was growing in these fields at the time. And with that, maybe Wayne wants to talk about that, or maybe he wants to bring the fight forward a little.
Sure. So let's first talk about the crops the soldiers have to go through here, because they're going to have to go through corn, which is about knee-high by the 4th of July, as we say in the area we're at. You're going to have winter wheat that's up almost to my waist. Much of this crushed down on July 2nd, 1863, when the troops were moving through here. Some of these fences have been taken out, as Colonel Doug mentioned, but others, the one especially along the Emmitsburg Road, is going to be a fence that's going to be tough for the troops to have to get through here. here on July 3rd, 1863. So right when we're at, as we come down in these low areas, we get some protection, but then we're going to come up here to the top of this crest, and we're going to get hit by artillery. And I want to point out, Gary mentioned Little Round Top. We've got to point out over here to the left where Kris is scanning, the little white farm that's there is the Abraham Bryan farm, owned by a free black man. Cemetery Hill right off to the left of that, and boy, there's at least 37 guns on that West Cemetery Hillside that's going to be firing right into here. That's exactly right. It's going to be perfect, Gary, into this line. Unfortunately, the left of this line will be raked with this artillery fire as the soldiers are moving forward. So we're on the right of Pettigrew, and we're going to have to face, as we hit these upper parts of the line, all that artillery is coming on to us. And then off over here to the right, where you all are standing, from Little Round Top and from the line that is above where the Kadori barn is, the barn that is right here behind me. Now, that's the newer barn. That's not the barn that was there in the battle, so that one is a little taller. But you're going to have to face all the artillery that's going to cross here. This is going to be a harrowing part of this attack. What's going through the minds of the soldiers here as they move forward here, tremendous. People are going to be lost every step as they go to here, and then when they get closer to the road, of course, they're going to come under infantry fire. But this is artillery fire. All we're dealing with here is going to be artillery fire, and unfortunately for the Confederates, a lot of it, and the Union Army, just take out as many as you can. That's the approach here for July 3rd.
When we think about that artillery too, we often bring up the debate that happens, certainly on this part of the line, is Henry Hunt, the chief of Union Artillery, has already gone at 10 o'clock this morning, talked to every artillery battery commander, concentrate your fire on a single battery, one aim shot a minute, would be up on Little Round Top when the Confederate bombardment starts, would make his way down, get parts of the artillery reserve headed this way, would end up on Cemetery Hill, and then kind of talking to General Howard of the 11th Corps, Major Osborne, the 11th Corps Chief of Artillery, goes, we don't know what this bombardment is a prelude to. And so comes up with the independent decision in talking to Howard of, we should stop firing that long-range ammunition. And it's not that the Union Army of the Potomac doesn't have ammunition. They do. They're going to fire 32,000 rounds of artillery. When it's all done, they have enough ammunition to fight it all over again. The problem is, can you get the artillery to the guns in time? So his idea, as a hedge against the unknown, we should shut down these batteries that they save some of their long-range artillery. And that's true, right until he gets to about the 2nd Corps position, which is about where the Abraham Bryan barn is. As Hunt would ride by and shut those batteries down, soon Winfield Scott Hancock, the commander of the 2nd Corps, would ride by and go, hey, you need to get that artillery fire going out. And what you really have is two different approaches. For Henry Hunt, right, this is the science of command. We talk about my guys march across the field. 1,300 feet, consider that, well, 28-inch step. We'll call that 110 steps a minute. That'll get you to at least 900 yards away, and then your last, you're going to go double quick time, so 33-inch steps, 165 steps a minute. Well, if you're Henry Hunt, you go, well, that's 11 and a half minutes. That means that's 9 rounds of solid shell case, and then that's probably 6 rounds of canister. That's the science of command. He's a technical expert. If you're Winfield Scott Hancock, that's your 6,000 infantrymen there getting pounded by 300 shells a minute. And you'd say, Henry Hunt, I find your artillery theory mildly interesting. We all know that if anybody comes across the field, it will be my 2nd Corps infantrymen that determine the outcome of this battle. And right now, why my infantrymen are getting pounded by artillery, the only thing they take perverse joy in is the thought that somebody else is getting pounded by artillery too. So Hancock will ride down and have his men continue to fire their artillery back. So when we think about where we are right now, Wayne's absolutely right. From Cemetery Hill, these guys are getting pounded. But about the point that we're starting to look at right now, we'd be pretty safe because the 2nd Corps, most of those batteries don't have any long-range ammunition, and we don't really have to worry about that problem until about the time we get to the Emmitsburg Road.
Doug, I'd like to build on what you were sharing there, but bring it to an infantryman's perspective. Oh, we're passing some microphones here. Because recently I was reading some accounts by soldiers from Massachusetts who are actually in the 2nd Corps right up on the line where this charge is going to be headed. And they mention that when the cannon fire starts to die down and smoke is beginning to rise a little bit, they're seeing Confederate infantry forming for this attack. And then they say as those troops, the Confederate troops, are moving across the field, there's times that they can see them and there's times that they can't. And I think about that as we're crossing this field, and just to build on what Doug was saying, there's times that these Confederates are under the artillery fire, and then there's times because of the terrain that they're not able to be seen. So while you could maybe put a shell exploding over their heads, why not wait until you can see that target? So just something interesting that stood out to me was something I was reading earlier in the week. Gary, I want to turn it back to you as we continue towards Cemetery Ridge.
Of course, thank you. I'm going to cue up Wayne for this a little bit, but just remember, these people walking across the field on this day, July 3rd, 1863, they're like us. We like to think we're different from the people of the past, and that somehow, well, that's them. They were in black and white, and they were hardier and lived outdoors and everything like that. But no, I mean, they got thirsty just like us. They cared about the same things that we do. And it's important to note that this battle is being fought, sometimes among friends. You're dealing with loss at the same time that these guys are wearing some pretty heavy clothing on what might be the hottest day of the entire summer, if summer starts on June 21st. And we've often used a sort of professor in town to know what the temperature is, but only recently has one of our battlefield guides and a meteorologist gotten together and really tried to nail down this campaign. I think Wayne knows a little bit something about this.
Gary, this is great, and we should tell, we've been doing these anniversary battle walks with ABT for many years, and it's appreciated. We've got some great new information, and there have been meteorological records found, and Jeff Harding, one of the licensed battlefield guides, Dr. John Neese, a meteorologist up at Penn State, just put a whole new book out, and it's called The Weather Gods Curse the Gettysburg Campaign, and it's by History Press. You can pick it up, and one of the things that they've discovered here using meteorological records is that in the shade, the heat index, which we really didn't know, Michael Jacobs wrote down the temperature as being 87 degrees on the afternoon of July 3rd, but we didn't know what the field temperature's like. What was the heat index like? And in the shade for Pickett's charge, it looks like it was almost 105 degrees in the shade. And with meteorological records at the Naval Observatory down in Washington, D.C., which is pretty close to here, the temperature on the ground would have been in the 130s, 130 degrees. The soldiers are wearing these 100% wool uniforms. So these Confederate soldiers have an enemy that's not just the Union line, but the weather and the conditions here that they've suffered lining up for the attack and now making this assault across here in this blistering heat and humidity on July 3rd, 1863, Gary.
Thanks, Wayne. Let me just say, too, that, we have, Wayne referenced them for the last 8 years. This is the only video we shoot every year. We don't always do Devil's Den and don't always do McPherson's Ridge, because we've been doing these lives since Gettysburg 154. But you can go back and see different paths and see different coverages of what we've done, and we encourage you to. Please don't take this Pickett's Charge video as the one, because we've done it every year for a number of years, or maybe skipping 1 year along the way. Now, maybe we can hand this back to Doug, or Wayne, you could keep this. Here we've gotten a little closer. Now, and this happens to be Doug's speciality, so let's see what we got. By the time the Confederates are here, there's probably no doubt in most of the unit commander, least of all Meade, knowing what's happening here, where the Confederates are headed. What's Meade doing? What is he putting in motion that's going to help with the repulse?
Yeah, this is a really good question, because we often go, oh, Meade's headquarters is destroyed, and we talk about, oh, he takes his staff outside, and then he makes his way to Powers Hill, realize he can't talk to anybody. And then we kind of go, well, that's it. Well, not really, because while they didn't know what this is a prelude to, I mean, as early as 10 o'clock in the morning, we got Howard talking about, look at all the artillery the Confederates are putting out. Meade recognizes this. Hunt recognizes this. But now that they know this attack is coming, Meade has sent out orders. And this really touches into some of the circulars that he writes earlier when he first gets on the battlefield, certainly on the morning of July 2nd, where essentially he assigns one of his staff to each of the corps, and also tasks each of the corps to assign one of their staff members to the headquarters to figure out how to get to their headquarters back and forth so that they can generate speed. Not only speed of decision, but speed of execution. So when they start to see this Confederate line exit out of the woods, and as the smoke starts to rise and Union soldiers start to talk about an incoming tide, an unstoppable wave, a machine, all that language, Meade's not sitting there admiring that. He's turned around, he's sent orders out. So effectively at this point, not only do we have the men that are in the angle, the 2nd Corps, but Meade sends out orders to the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 6 corps. Effectively, he has 17 different brigades headed this way to the center of the Union line to bolster that position. Because now that the Confederates started moving across this field, they don't march under a Confederate artillery bombardment. So that's now free ground behind that ridge line, that there's cover and concealment, that they can move in protection. You go 17 brigades in the Army of the Potomac, that's almost a quarter of the brigades within the Army of the Potomac. Now, I won't say it's a quarter of their numbers, because Lord knows the 1st Corps, the 3rd Corps, those are not full-size brigades at that point, but that is a lot of Union power headed to that position, because now the Confederates are telegraphing this punch. It's a little bit what we were just talking about when we brought up the idea of Chancellorsville. Chancellorsville becomes interesting, but for a lot of Lee's lines, they're hidden in the woods, and there's the fear of the unknown. How big of a line is that? But now the Union can see the extent of this, the northern and southern extent of this attack, and they know where it's coming, and so we have all kind of forces headed to deal with this.
I got a few things to talk about. First of all,
Please.
I'm gratified to hear you say this 17 brigade things. Once, and only once, did I read the Gettysburg official records. That's the 3 volumes of about 2,500 pages that really gets into all the official orders and correspondence from this battle, Union and Confederate. And after I read it, I realized that Meade sent a lot more people to the center during Pickett's charge than he had to bail out Sickles on the 2nd day. And I remember talking to Wayne and Jim Hessler about this. I mean, I think it's upwards of 20 to 25,000 soldiers. It could even be 30, although your point is really good that these brigades aren't that large. So I think Meade is going all in, using his interior line in his fishhook to really bring it together. I want to get to what people might be seeing here, because we're near a farm that would have been burning at the time and a lot more. But first, if Kris can swing over here real quick, I just want to point out, Wayne was talking about Cemetery Hill that you can see over there, but there's one building that is sort of foremost blocking some of the view to Cemetery Hill, and it is brown, and that is General Pickett's buffet, which you, the members of the American Battlefield Trust, helped us to preserve that land. Eventually we will take that structure down. It might be sooner than you think it'll be, and then we're left with a clear view of Cemetery Hill. A perfect one? No, I can still see the KFC and the McDonald's there, but taking out that 2-story building is really going to help bit by bit to increase our ability to view this stuff. Now, Wayne, as you come up, there's a farm over there by a particularly well-known Union man. We've got the Union line maybe starting to explode or getting ready to explode in rifle fire. Maybe we're starting to get a view of some of Pickett's soldiers over here. So paint the scene as we move forward at a slow rate.
Well, Garry, let's start with Kris over here. Thank heavens Kris is behind the camera. The Bliss farm. William Bliss owned a farm right out here in the middle of what will become the fields of Pickett's charge. Unfortunately for Farmer Bliss, his farmstead will be completely destroyed. And this farm is burned during the time of the battle before Pickett's charge. And the troops, this will be smoldering as they move through it. Now, also, this artillery fire that's off here to the front left of the view, which would be above where the General Pickett's buffet is located.
I think I see some of the smoke coming in
see
there. It looks like clouds, but that's artillery
yes,
fire.
Wayne. Right on cue, everybody. Just for you, the viewers of the American Battlefield Trust 162, you get the smoke view above there. And right there above where that is located, the guns on West Cemetery Hill are going to be firing into the extreme left of what would be General Pettigrew's division, and that will be the Brigade of Virginians under John Brockenbrough, and they probably get right around where that property is or near it, and then they're going to retreat and withdraw, and they won't take very many casualties because we have the casualty reports, but that is going to leave the left of this Confederate line, Joe Davis's brigade, the nephew of the Confederacy, Mississippians, going to leave them pretty much open as they march across here. And Robert E. Lee actually references that artillery as one of the reasons why this attack fails. He has 2 reports in Gettysburg. He references the artillery twice as to the failure of this attack. And then if you swing around here and you talk about the artillery line that is in front of us that Doug mentioned, and also off over here to our right as Armstead and Garnett and Kemper's men are moving out across here. They're going to be hit by this flanking artillery fire, frontal artillery fire from Freeman McGilvery's artillery line. And then when they get on the road, then they'll hit the infantry fire, and plus they'll be changed to canister for the artillery. So this is you're in the area right here where you're going to just start to get hit with artillery as you move up forward. You had some protection coming in these lower pieces of ground that are here, but the left has been driven off, and the right is under a heavy crossfire here as we move.
That's a really good point. This is what Garry was mentioning before. Well, if you follow Pickett's division, they have cover concealment almost all the way up into the Emmitsburg Road. Not so for Pettigrew and Trimble. As we line this up, remember, one of the things we've done is we've got Pettigrew is the division of orientation, so they're going straight across this field. Behind them would be Trimble. That's how we're providing mass, right? Because when we hit this, we want a compact fist to shatter the Union line. They're going straight across the field. If we look off to our right, Pickett's guys are now on an angle. There's about a 300-yard gap. And the idea is about the time that they get to the Emmitsburg Road, they're all going to join up. So this not only has almost a mile in width, but it also has depth, which is going to provide the mass. This is kind of the idea of, hey, we're going to put a column against a line, and that mass should be able to deliver the knockout punch when we hit it.
Good, good. So here we are. You're with the American Battlefield Trust. We are crossing the field of Pickett's charge. We hope you're finding this meaningful. We hope that you'll plan a trip to come to Gettysburg sort of as a result. And some of these things Doug mentioned earlier, that General Meade is, arranging to repel this assault. These troops aren't here yet, but some of them are getting underway by the time, you're seeing Pettigrew's men over here. I also want to mention, I love this idea that you guys were both talking about, that over on the right, you've got the rightmost elements of Pickett's division melting away. On the left, we have Brockenbraugh's Virginia's melting away. And it's no surprise that right in front of us and to our front left is where the Confederates are going to be able to mass the most. That is because it is not good to be on the end. It's almost like the flank in this case is, destined to fall. And I think that it's about to get worse. We haven't even talked about what Meade does specifically upon these flanks. Maybe this is an interesting time to get into that, Doug.
Yeah, well, but like I said, because this attack is not in the woods, they can see the extent of it, the northern and southern reach. Once they see Davis's brigade start to break, or Brockenborough's brigade start to break and fall back, the 8th Ohio, off to the very end of this Union line, out on the skirmish line, realize nobody's going to hit their front. So what he's going to do is the commander, Colonel Red Sawyer, will order his men to wheel out, and now they're going to start to fire into the northern flank of this. Just like we know on any other line in the American Civil War, your flanks are vulnerable. So not only are the Confederates being fired at their front, they're now being fired at by the northern flank. And if we look down just to the left of the Pennsylvania Monument, that dome monument, you can see a guy on top of a column. Those are Vermonters. So really 9-month men raised for the Antietam campaign, 2 weeks left of service, pulled from the defenses of Washington to plus up the numbers in the Army of the Potomac for this campaign. This is really their first battle. They also are going to realize nobody is at their front. In fact, Winfield Scott Hancock will ride down there and order them into the fight. And these are large regiments, 460, 465 men apiece. And those Vermonters are going to wheel out, and they're going to start to shoot into the southern flank of this attack. So I often like to say, Pickett's charge isn't attacking into a wall. It's attacking into the bottom of a box, and now it's being fired at by 3 sides.
Wow. And maybe Wayne could talk about this real quick. Doug just mentioned what a difference that these sort of green, I don't mean Green Mountain, but greenish Vermonters, how they can make a difference for the Union Army. Robert E. Lee, before he began this campaign, was furiously attempting to assemble as many soldiers as he could for this campaign. And here you have the division commander who, lends his name to most people's idea for this attack, Pickett's charge. He is short a couple of brigades. I don't want to get into what ifs here, but, what a difference one extra unit can make at the right time.
And Garry, this unit happened to be a big unit. These Vermonters are just 9-month soldiers. They're about ready to be discharged out of the service. And so these 3 regiments, standards, I had 5. A couple of them are guarding wagon trains, but you're talking about 1,500 to 1,800 total men on this left side, and they're just going to drive a wedge right in between where the Confederates are. They're going to strike the right of Pickett's line under General Kemper. Then they're going to turn and move and hit the left of the line that is where Lang and Wilcox are, beyond where the road are, where you see here in the cars moving in the distance. Yeah. And then at the same time, the Colonel Doug is mentioning the 8th Ohio going against the left of this. So the troops are are facing a lot once they get here. And once they get here, they're going to come under this infantry fire from the center of the Union line, right up against this fence along the Emmitsburg Road. And as Colonel Doug mentioned, this fence here is going to be a terrific problem for them to try to surmount. It is going to be a major obstacle for the command. And this road was sunken during the battle. Doesn't look quite what it looks like today. So it's going to be an issue, and there's going to be a pause right here. And the longer that pause is, you've got more trouble for the Confederates that are here.
You know, this is a blessing and a curse. I imagine we'll talk about that in just a minute. I think Doug's getting ready to do it. But let me just say that, let me get this straight. Things were already rough on Pickett's right. Things were already rough on Pettigrew's left. And then Meade and his commanders go and create the three-sided box and make it much rougher. So suddenly the 12,000-ish, 6,000, 15,000 men who were making this attack against 5,000, suddenly a lot of them are getting killed along the way, and they're melting away, and suddenly Lee's overwhelming numbers just aren't going to play as much.
Yeah, that's right. And if you're a Confederate soldier, you're looking for reinforcements. I mean, what you're looking for is the fact that are you going to have friends come and reinforce this line? We know that Anderson had orders that once that this was to be pressed, that more troops would come up here on the battlefield. And now General Longstreet, who's sitting on the fence at the Point of Woods over here behind me, he's got to make a choice. Do I send those men forward or do I not, when he's watching this attack falter right in front of his eyes? And he's got to make a very tough decision. And that decision is not to go ahead and support this any further because he sees that that's going to be a futile thing. He's going to pay a heavy price for that after the American Civil War when a lot of these units are looking. They're trying to figure out where did those supports go, what happened to the supports that were here. And General Longstreet is the one that's going to make calls for them not to go forward because he realizes they're just getting chewed up here.
All right, and just imagine, by the way, Longstreet's sitting right there. That's a good thing about battlefields. This field, that hillock, that ridge, that point of woods. I mean, this is, that we can actually see it and that they wrote about it, okay? So I'm going to ask Doug to take us to and to beyond the Emmitsburg Road here. Wayne mentioned that this is going to be a problem. It's sunken. You would think that would be a good thing, but what kind of an obstacle is this, Doug?
Yeah, so this becomes interesting. We were talking about how fences get knocked down. Now, one of the problems that the Confederates face when they hit the Emmitsburg Road is, I always like to say, whether these fences were built for Mennonites to last for decades or what, when they get there, they can't push them over. So the decision is made to order men to climb the fences. If you think about that now, all our momentum, because we're moving at this point now, we're heading at a pretty good clip because nobody wants to be out here. So when they get to this fence line, now all of a sudden they push it over. Come on, boys, put your back into it. Come on, boys, one more time with spirit. And they can't. So now the order is we've got to keep going to order men to climb the fences and down the other side. Now, we've just come across a long stretch of ground for which these guys have had no cover and concealment. So now that they have it, you can imagine they get into this road, as Wayne mentioned, it's a bit of a sunken road. Now, all of a sudden, for the first time, they have cover and concealment. It's brave to think that the Confederates make it to the road. Imagine the leadership going up and down the road going, get up, boys, you can't stay here. You got to get them up, then get them to climb the next fence, and then down the other side, and then covering a line, boys, covering a line. Nobody goes forward till we're all together, right? To get everybody back together, because we need this to be a concerted clenched fist when we hit the Union line. It's miraculous to think about the discipline it took in the midst of this chaos to keep these units together.
Yeah, and Wayne, so I'm going to ask you when we get up there, you're going to take this thing home. But even for now, what about these last minutes? I know you've been studying Armistead's guys for a long time.
Yeah.
This is the famous movie scene where it actually happened, not where they filmed it here.
Right.
Set this stage for these men, and if you want, we'll be in the Union line soon enough where you can set them up. But man, what's going on right behind you?
So right here where we're standing, this is going to be the biggest killing ground for this attack on July 3rd, 1863. From the road up to where the angle is located, up to the stone wall, that's where the majority of the soldiers are going to be killed, wounded, or captured here later on for July 3rd, right where we're standing. Armstead's brigade, the one that's right over here behind me, crosses this road. General Armstead is on foot. He'll put his hat on his sword. We don't know exactly when. Here, Garry can illustrate that. There you go. And he'll yell for the men to go forward. as he moves up along this, as Gary's doing. Now, as Colonel Doug said, they're getting these people out, trying to get them back into some semblance of a battle line, but the problem is the leadership here have all been killed off. So this is really an armed mob crossing the Emmitsburg Road. There's not much order to it. General Garnett is up in front. He's on a horse when he takes a rifle bullet, unfortunately, in the head and falls down, and his body will be stripped. It will be unidentified. It's still unknown. The only Confederate general killed in the American Civil War, his body not identified, resting somewhere. And those troops move right across here. And then behind, we'll swing around just over here. You've got all of Pettigrew and Trimble's men, Davis's brigade, moving right off over here to our left. And they'll get right up to the white barn of Abraham Bryan. Literally, the 11th Mississippi will surrender right on the west side of where the barn is, right on the white portion of that. So from here forward, Gary, this is going to be where the majority of the Confederates that fall in this attack on July 3rd are going to fall. Right.
We've talked about this. We have burial maps as to whether there are more Confederate graves on that side of the road versus this side of the road. Of course, you talk about percentages then, and there's a lot more Confederates on that side of the road, and only a certain number actually crossed this road, making those who died here or fell here, all the more striking in terms of percentage. Now, I'm going to leave this up to Kris. He's going to shake his head or nod his head, but maybe something's telling me that Kris should just walk out front. We'll have a moment of Zen while they can, picture what this might have been like for the troops who are over here. Let's see. He didn't shake his head at me, so I think he's doing it reluctantly, but he's going to do it. He's más o menos.
Certainly at this point, when we think about the Confederates who have held their discipline together, now all of a sudden they got their last line, they're coming in this last position, the Union line is open fire, the infantry is open fire, the artillery is transitioned to canister. You can imagine when they get about 100 yards away, they're going to level their rifles, deliver a volley, and that's when it becomes Pickett's charge. Now all of a sudden we hear the rebel yell, and the Confederates are going to take off on the run. This is what's going to ultimately slam into the Union line. But when we think about Pickett's charge, I would argue this becomes the iconic scene we picture in our mind's eye as these two lines close together in what is the ultimate test, even on a modern battlefield, of how do you close the last 100 yards.
Yeah, and here we are approaching. This place is called the Angle because of the stone wall you really see. We're approaching the point of the angle. You can see the wall going off to the right. It would have been a low stone wall at the time, but then it angles back to the road before continuing along the road. The road was not here. So really that's why it's important, because it made a weak point, because there's some Union strength along this wall and Union strength along the wall you see to your front that Kris is pointing to there, but there's no real strength along this side wall. It's no surprise this is where the Confederates are more successful. Now, we're going to ask you, we're going to climb over here, Wayne, and you just take this thing home like we're on a tour, but in your most passionate manner, no pressure.
Oh, thanks, Gary, no pressure. So we're going to go over here? Okay,
Yep.
Let's get on this side of where the angle is. All right. So as we cross over this stone wall, of course, the stone wall here during the time of the battle, we're right on the right flank of where Pettigrew's command would have been, the 13th Alabama Infantry. Great story about their flag. Their flag is about 60 yards right off of where we're at right here. And that flag, one of the color bearers gets shot down. The Union soldier's going to run out, and a soldier in C Company of the 1st Delaware, this guy Bernard McCarran, he'll capture it right out somewhere, right out here. That flag went to the Alabama Department of Archives and History after it went to the War Department. 1905 or so it was sent to Alabama, and now it is on display at the Gettysburg National Military Park Visitor Center. It has not been back to Gettysburg since the day it was captured here on Pickett's charge 162 years ago. So that is worth seeing if you get a chance to see it. So those men are squirming all around this wall. Right here we're at. Then if we move over here to the left, Kris, right along the wall here, General Armstead will cross with his Virginians, and we always get the question, how many men came across here for July 3rd? How many penetrated the line here? It's probably 150 soldiers. They're going to get right inside this line, and several of the Confederate flags will get right forward into the guns of Alonzo Cushing. He probably had 2 guns right up here near where the stone wall is. He's wounded in the shoulder, he's wounded in the groin, and he falls commanding the artillery here, 22 years old, inside this angle against the Virginians, and a bullet goes right through his mouth, out the back of his head, and he's killed instantly. Many years later, President Barack Obama awards him the Congressional Medal of Honor. So he's Medal of Honor recipient here for the Battle of Gettysburg, the last one that we had, the most recent one for here. And the Virginians are going to come right in here, but let me give you a little story about the flag. The flag of the 53rd Virginia, right up inside where this is, the color bearer, Hutchings Carter, had picked it up right along the wall. He ran it forward, and he will surrender right up here where a second line of Cushing's guns were, probably guns that were disabled and removed. This monument put up here later. Hutchings Carter, according to the reports, had 17 bullet holes in his clothes and not a mark on his body. The bullets went right through the loose part of his clothing, and that flag is captured inside these guns as the Union Army seals off this assault for the Confederates and the breakthrough. And then over here behind Colonel Doug, where you see the Bryan farm, the 11th Mississippi got their flag right on the west side of that barn, and the Union Army are on the right side of the barn. The distance between the line is to the right and left, where that stone wall is, and the left of the barn. That distance alone is the distance separating the Union and Confederate soldiers, and the 11th Mississippi surrenders right there, probably the furthest regiment in this attack for July 3rd, 1863, and that flag also is captured here. So we call this the high water mark, and it's called that for a reason, because this is where the attack ends. It's where it's crested, where it subsides here for July 3rd, 1863, with devastating results of the Confederates. And Gary, we didn't mention much of it, but what a stout Union defense. We could do a whole tour, ladies and gentlemen, and we have on the videos at the American Battlefield Trust, just on the Union defense. A terrific defense made by the Union soldiers here on July 3rd. Very tenacious, very gritty. And for the Confederate soldiers, as Colonel Doug mentioned, what valor to come up here and do what they did on July 3rd, 1863. In the end of the day, this attack is a failure for July 3rd, and we're standing right at the end of it after our 1 mile walk, Gary.
Wayne, I think it's really important and interesting that you bring up the idea of just the difference in defense approaches for the Union to receive this. So they're all Second Corps men, arguably the hardiest, best, we could have that debate over a good beer, the best corps in the American Civil War. But if you think about it, on this side of the angle, in Gibbon's line, it's a defense in depth. Right, we're going to start with 71st Pennsylvania, 69th Pennsylvania. We're going to start with a group up there. We're also going to have a secondary line back where the road is today. And of course, that wasn't there at the time. That's how they choose to defend this. And of course, when Alexander Webb makes the charge with the 71st and 72nd, right, that defense in depth is playing out. That's how that works. Alexander Hayes does almost the exact opposite. He goes, we're not going to defend in depth. Well, so he's going to have is he has almost 4 men deep lined up against the wall up there. That's an interesting prospect. You know, historically speaking, if you think about it, men in battle, roughly 15% are the true killers. That statistically holds really all the way through World War II. And even with modern training systems, you might bump that number up to 20, 25%. But what that means is 15% of the killers, they're all up front. Everybody else is loading rifles to hand to them so that they can go ahead and gun down those Confederates. So what you see is 2 different tactical approaches to the defense of this Union line. I find that to be an interesting study, probably both of the personalities of the commander, but also the topography that they're given and the ground that they have to defend as they do so. One of the other things I like to point out is we were kind of firing Fry's brigade. There's a young man in the 14th Tennessee named June Kimball. who before this all starts will walk out to the tree line and says out loud, "June Kimball, are you going to do your duty today?" And there's a man sitting on a fence line who hears him say that and says, "I wanted to walk away because I felt like I was looking into his soul. But mostly I wanted to hear his answer, so I didn't move." And finally, June Kimball says out loud, "By God, I will." Now, as they approach the Emmitsburg Road, all of a sudden he would be joined by a guy named Theo Hartman who goes, "I'm with you, Kimball." And he said they made a compact. And once they crossed the road, another man would come up and join them. And that would only be short-lived because another 10 steps he would be killed. June Kimball would make it somewhere across this field when he said, "All of a sudden I saw bars in front of my eyes and I knew I would be captured." So he throws his rifle down and he turns around and he starts to run. But to his horror, he realizes Union troops are still firing at him. And nothing could be considered more cowardly than to be shot in the back. So what June Kimball's going to do is stop, turn around, jog back, go find his rifle, put it on his shoulder, and then he's going to walk backwards all the way across the field until he gets to that far tree line without a scratch. So one more of those stories of one of those Confederate soldiers who's here.
This is great, guys. I just reacting to some of what you said. First of all, when Wayne talked about how close the lines were together over here, there are actually accounts of some of the Union soldiers actually grabbing the Confederates from one side of the wall and dragging them over to the other side. I mean, that's pretty close quarters fighting there. I want to say, too, that I picture it over there. I'd be curious to see if you disagree with this, but I picture it somewhere near his statue where Meade comes riding up, and he's been working behind the lines to make sure the reinforcements are coming up. It is those reinforcements that really steadied the Union line when the Confederates broke through here. There wasn't a whole lot of them here yet, but all those monuments, the ones you see on the far side of the road over there, that's to represent some of the reinforcements Meade brought up. Meade rides up and asks somebody who's on the scene, "How's it going?" And they say, "We repulsed them, it's over." And I think Meade's quote is, "What, already?" Like he couldn't believe it. And that's the third thing I wanted to say. What a defeat this was. The Union Army had been looking for something like this for a while. They had never truly beaten Robert E. Lee the way that he was beaten here. 23 battle flags lost. Wayne talked about these. More than Lee had lost up to that point in the entire war combined. The Union troops were chanting, "Fredericksburg, Fredericksburg." They finally won. They were really excited. And one more thing that I like to say is sometimes I'm up here with Doug and we're talking about what's going on in the clump of trees where some of these tough Irishmen from the 69 PA bend back, and there's literally a melee in there. If Wayne will hand Doug his mic for a sec, I'm going to put Doug on the spot. Hit me with that quote, something about man to man, body to body.
Yeah, so once the Confederates break through, and Wayne did a great job of talking about when Lewis Armistead's men break through, the copse of trees, that group of trees, was larger at the time. The 42nd New York, the 19th Massachusetts would counterattack through that copse of trees. Colonel Devereux afterward would write, "Foot to foot, body to body, man to man, struggling, pushing, striving, killing, covered in sweat, black with smoke, red with blood." Men in the copse of trees would have at each other. We were just talking about how close they were. Club muskets, bayonets, thrown fists, thrown rocks. Color bearer, the 19th Massachusetts, will go find the color bearer of the 14th Virginia, beat him with the flagstaff, steal the 14th Virginia battle flag, go hand it to Colonel Devereux, get back in the front of the firing line, and for those actions, Corporal Joseph de Castro becomes the first Hispanic American that would be awarded the Medal of Honor for the actions that take place. Oh, by the way, 19th Massachusetts, I think there are 5 Medal of Honor winners in the 19th Massachusetts in those copse of trees for the actions that they have here on July 3rd.
Man, and you know, we could, I think between the 5 of us here, we probably know a lot of stories of Pickett's charge. And you could see a lot of those in Wayne and Jim's book. You can see them in Stewart's microhistory. You can see them in Edwin B. Coddington and other places, Gettysburg Magazine articles and otherwise. But let's move on a little bit. We don't just stand at the height of this attack. This is the most famous attack in American history, many people will say. But we're standing at a place that people know. It's memorialized. We've got the most famous clump of trees in America. So famous it's called a copse, which you really don't see in this country very much. We're overlooking the round tops. Everybody seemed to want their monument here. Wayne, you know, is this what it looked like at the time of the battle minus the monuments?
Oh yeah, so that's an excellent question. So when you look at the copse of trees was still small, but it was probably wider because we know in the 1870s Nicholas Cadore came out here and they were cutting down some of these trees originally first. So the monument, the high water mark put around to protect the trees. But what's interesting is really not from the visitor, but from the veterans who were taking off that wood and making memorial canes and other types of souvenirs out of there. Most of the memorials that you see back here behind me would be put here in the 1880s. So these are monuments, as Colonel Doug mentioned, to Alexander Stewart Webb, another recipient of the Medal of Honor here at Gettysburg, to his brigade, the defending brigade that are here, And then the War Department put up the plaque and the artillery during the War Department year. So the Gettysburg Battlefield Memorial Association preserving the battlefield, chartered in 1864, preserving it up to 1895, and then the Gettysburg National Military Park taking over in 1895, and that going to the War Department until 1933, when it goes to the Department of Interior, National Park Service, which it is today. So most of the memorials you see here, the 1880s would have been when they would have been placed here, Garry, on the battlefield.
It's interesting to think about too, we talk about not only are there Union monuments here, but there are also Confederate monuments here. When we bring international officers or when we bring dignitaries from other countries and we bring them around this battlefield, they are stunned with the prospect that a former adversary would put a monument on a battlefield. And yet, when we think about this, as Wayne was talking and Garry brought up the idea that this becomes hallowed ground, it becomes part of the nation's story. The idea, for all the divisions in our nation today, we can look back at this time and go, think about these veterans and the idea that they ultimately decide to start to reunify the nation, but that they allow other people to put up monuments that recognize those they fought with and even the sacrifices that they have here. It is testament to that generation that they start to heal themselves, that the nation might move forward. And so this becomes not only hallowed ground because of the soldiers that were killed here, but also for the precedent that sets for every other generations that regardless of the divisions within our nation, there's always hope that we might come back together. And certainly that's part of the story of this battlefield too.
Good. Well spoken, Wayne. I'm sorry, Doug. We're going to do a little walk this way because we really haven't pointed out General George Gordon Meade's statue, and it is designed by design that he faces Robert E. Lee across the field we just walked. We almost did an A to B sort of walk exactly there, but you could see some of the memorialization. I see a Confederate monument really close, but not inside the Union lines there. It brings up something what Doug said that I wanted to ask Wayne about. Wayne, 1 minute I can hear you talk about the men of the 54th Massachusetts and their fight for freedom, and then I can hear you talk about Epahunton or Cullen Battle, Confederates who later wrote about this place. Is this what we're supposed to do? Here we have a former adversary that was fighting against us, but we use their accounts. Is it incongruous sort of to talk about both sides of a fight?
I think you've got to, Garry. You've got a Civil War that had two sides. You've got stories coming out of both of those sides, and you've got lessons to be learned on both of those sides in the Civil War. I think it does us a great disservice if we only look at one side and we don't look at the other. This was a human experience here. All of us can relate to the fact that these men are fathers, they're husbands, they're sons, they're uncles, they're people just like you and I, and the color of their uniform, that made a difference in the Civil War. But in the views today, I think we have to understand it's a common human experience here, and we've got a lot of things we can learn from the Union and Confederate perspective about this. So I think we ought to study both sides of the Civil War, and the stories are worthy to be told. The legacy goes on, and we need to learn what those are for both sides of the Civil War, and I think it's important that we do both of those sides. Let me say, too, one thing that we don't often talk about is the mental aspect of this, and I've said it before on some of these talks and walks that we've done, that there are tremendous mental health challenges that many of these Civil War soldiers face, Union and Confederate. We walked across this field. There were soldiers that did this in July of 1863. They were asked to come back, and they could never come back again and do the walk that we just did because of what it did to them psychologically. So all of the soldiers here at Gettysburg, whether you're physically hurt or not, you're going to be psychologically impaired for the rest of your life from this assault. And you're going to remember your circle of friends just got a lot smaller, whether you're Union or Confederate here. You had friends, you look around the campfires at night, and every time you go into another battle, the faces around that campsite and around that campfire are going to be fewer. And you're going to be one of the last people standing if you're lucky enough, blessed enough to be standing there. Okay?
And maybe feeling guilty about it.
Yeah, of course, of course.
So as we are walking here, we're approaching about the length of that Pickett's charge took. it's pretty hard for people to understand when they go on a battlefield tour. Sometimes if it's an all-day tour, they're spending more time here on the battlefield than many of the soldiers did during the Civil War, okay? This is a 3-day battle out of a 4-year war, out of a long history, and I think that's something what Sarah Bierle wants to talk about. I mean, this is a blip in time, and we could spend our entire lives talking, learning about this and trying to understand the event, but tell us what you're thinking.
Thanks, Gary. This is something I've been thinking about for a couple years, actually, and I think it's appropriate to bring it up this year as we're walking across the fields of Pickett's charge. So this is the 162nd anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg. But when the Battle of Gettysburg is fought, think about the distance that it is from the American Revolution. Right now, we are 250 years from 1775, the beginning of the American Revolution. And to kind of give it a little bit of perspective, and I'm going to speak loosely here, not in exact dates, but we know that the Civil Wars fought about 80 years after the American Revolution. Right now, we're about 80 years after World War II, or at least the ending of World War II. So think about the effects that that's having. The Civil War soldiers that are fighting here, ones that are participating in the Confederate brigades coming across these fields in Pickett's charge, and also men who are here on Cemetery Ridge defending the Union line, they're the descendants of the Revolutionary generation, grandsons, great-grandsons. And this is often in their minds. Over the last few years, I keep running across these moments or little snippets in men's writing where they're reflecting back on the American Revolution and seeing it as this inspiration. And this goes for Union and Confederate. I want to quickly mention 2 descendants that are here up in this area as the Battle of Gettysburg is unfolding. And that's Colonel William Aylett of the 53rd Virginia. He is in Armistead's brigade. He is the great-grandson of Patrick Henry. So we have some revolutionary descendants right here at the Battle of Gettysburg. On the Union side, let me mention Colonel Paul Revere. He's commanding the 20th Massachusetts. Now, he's not here on the field on July 3rd, although his regiment will be, because Revere is wounded on July 2nd in some fighting that his men had. Now, Revere, you might think, oh, with that last name, his men loved him. Actually not. There's quite a bit of writing and some dissent among other officers as he's coming to take command of the regiment in the earlier spring of 1863. But Revere is going to be mortally wounded here at Gettysburg on July 2nd. Again, he's the grandson of Paul Revere, one of those famous midnight messengers of 1775 at the very beginning of the American Revolution on the eve of Lexington and Concord. So when I look at these fields, I try to think about what's in these men's minds. What do they reflect back on history? We're standing here reflecting on their history, the fight here at Gettysburg. What do they reflect back on? How are they defining liberty, Declaration of Independence, things like that in this moment? And both sides are doing it. Both sides often reach slightly or varying different conclusions as to what the revolution means. And that's a really interesting thing, how the American Revolution, 80-ish years from them in the past, is inspiring their actions of today, just as we're looking at the actions of the soldiers here and drawing inspiration as well.
Sarah, I love this perspective about 80 years at a pop, because when you think about this, we often talk about here at Gettysburg when we think Lincoln goes 407 years ago, and we say he goes back to our Declaration of Independence. Interesting. Had he gone from the end of the Revolution when the treaty's actually signed, that's 1783, so it's exactly 80 years, a biblical generation. And then we just talked about all those Civil War soldiers who are stewards of the great experiment that their fathers and grandfathers had given them. That was the greatest generation to them. The founders, they're the ones who created this nation from nothing. And then they're here. So it's interesting, though, when we think about Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, I would argue he redefines the war for the third time. So it's to preserve the Union initially. It's to emancipate the slaves. And then here, remember the language he uses, that this nation or any nation so conceived or so dedicated. The audience, the world will little note nor long remember. And even think how he ends. Government of, by, and for the people shall not perish. He could have ended right there, but he doesn't. It says shall not perish from the earth. So think about what that means then. This generation, Abraham Lincoln says, no, these values aren't just for us. They belong to the world. He has a vision that they belong to everyone. So it's interesting to think about. We just got done celebrating the 81st anniversary of D-Day. You think about that generation. It was a Civil War generation. They were 2 generations removed from the American Civil War. Who they thought the greatest generation was the Civil War generation. Of course, we stand here today. Just got done celebrating the end of World War II in 1945. And we stand here today in 2025, exactly 80 years distance from them, and we consider them the greatest generation. All of this should suggest then that apparently about every 80 years in our nation's history, we are destined to need another generation to step up to the great trials we face. The interesting thing is, 80 years from now, will people look back at us and consider us to be the greatest generation because how we've defined this time and the challenges we face? Gang, thank you for joining us out here on this battlefield. We're grateful for your time and for your efforts to support the American Battlefield Trust, the preservation of these battlefields, and the study of American history.